So my name is Clayton, and I grew up in East Central Illinois. I grew up on a medium-sized family farm, and when I was a little kid, one of my favorite memories was going out with Grandpa. And we'd walk into our soybean fields, and so Grandpa's going through, but to me it was like walking through Jumanji, you know, trying to like hop over all the soybean rows when I'm like 7 or 8 years old. And it was really cool to get to go with my grandpa, and actually, you know, I didn't know it then, but we were phenotyping our soybeans. And so he would come out with his shovel, and we would start digging into the soil, and we'd pull one up out of the ground, and he would start showing me this whole other world that's happening in the soil. You know, I'd always get to ride with Mom and Dad in the vehicle or with my uncle in the tractor, and I'd see everything above, and I loved riding the combine, but you know, that's only half the story to the plant. And everything else that's going on below is really feeding up into that top part. And so digging those soybean roots with my grandpa was really exciting for me. And he started explaining to me all the different parts of the soybean roots. And so he would pull one out of the ground, and we'd start looking at it, and he'd start showing me all the different parts. And, you know, just like for you all, you know, it's really important to understand what all we're looking at here. So we've got ourselves a soybean root. And this is actually a really special root. This is a cultivar that was developed here at Iowa State University, and this is what we would call an elite line. So this is something that farmers would grow in their fields. And so he started showing me all the different parts, and I'll see if you all know, if you remember any of your intro to agronomy classes here, where there's kind of two main different types of roots between corn and soybeans. You remember what those two different kinds are? There's two types. What is it? Fibrous and tap. Well done, all right. So, and what kind of root do we have here on soybeans? Taproot, right? All right. Now, bonus points. Can anyone show me the actual taproot on this plant? Where's that? You can point to it there. Yeah, exactly, right? This whole thing right here, from like fingertip to fingertip, that's the taproot right there. So he would show me this taproot, and then he would explain how everything coming off of here, these are the secondary roots, or the lateral roots, that start growing off the sides. And then he started, I was looking, and he's showing me more things, all of the different roots coming off, and I said, hey, Grandpa, what are these little round things that are on here? And he started explaining to me that they're nodules. All right, now how many of you are familiar with nodules? All right, most people. So who can explain what a nodule is and what it does?
A nodule is how a bean plant naturally produces its own nitrogen.
Yeah, that's awesome, all right? So it's producing its own nitrogen. So my question is the soybean plant itself producing the nitrogen? I see some heads shaking. Do you know what it is?
Bacteria.
A bacteria, all right? Double bonus points. Anyone know what that bacteria is? It starts with a B, ends with rhizobia. All right, so it's bradyrhizobia, all right? So this is a pretty awesome little bacteria, and they work in a sweet relationship called a symbiotic relationship. And when that's happening, you know, inside of this nodule, all the bacteria are housed in there, and they're able to pull that atmospheric N2 nitrogen, that pretty much worthless nitrogen to us. All we do is just breathe it all the time. It just goes in right back out. And for plants, it's the same way. They can't use that nitrogen that's in the air. But this bacteria, it's got some cool redox reactions, if you remember those from high school or college chemistry, and it's able to take that diatomic nitrogen and fix it into an ammonia form that's usable by the soybean plant. So why do we care about nitrogen? Why is that so important? What do you think? What's nitrogen used for? What do you got? Growth, all right? So nitrogen is super important for growth. What happens if you don't have a whole lot of nitrogen? What's your plant going to look like? It's going to be yellow, right? If you've got corn specifically that doesn't have any nitrogen, if it's really fighting for that, it's going to look really yellow, probably pretty runted. It's going to look kind of sad, right? So we have to put a ton of nitrogen on for our cornfields, but with our soybean plants, they're able to start fixing their own nitrogen by having that relationship with the bacteria. So Grandpa and I kept looking at these nodules, and I thought, man, that's really cool. That's pretty awesome stuff. And so, you know, as a little kid, I didn't think too much of it then after that, and just kept living my life, growing up on the farm. And then I got to come here to university and start exploring, you know, what can I actually investigate in these roots? You know, we see so many different root types, and you can even see two different roots here. And I said to myself, all right, so there's a lot of differences going on between these two roots. All right, so I'm going to point it to here. What are some differences that you see in these roots? All right, so which one?
That one.
All right, so it's a little smaller, roots are closer together. What about this one? What do you think?
It's just, there's more nodules on that one.
Yeah, more nodules. All right. What about you two? What are some differences here?
That one seems to be more spread out a little bit.
Yeah. And what about this one? Anything else? There's all sorts of different stuff. There's no wrong answer. There's all sorts of differences.
This one's maybe a little bit more cupped, whereas that one goes flat out.
Oh, nice. All right. Can you all see that? See how this one really starts to go further out, and this one, the roots start to drop down more into the soil? All right. What other differences do you all see here?
Taproot looks thinner but longer on this one.
Okay, so potentially longer. You know, sometimes I got to chalk that up for how I dug it. Sometimes I don't get to be the best at that. But yeah, it definitely looks a lot longer and thicker on this one. What else do you see?
The structural differences of the secondary roots, how these ones here are a lot thinner, maybe not as strong compared to those, but they seem to have more nodules on them.
Yeah, so we got that going on, definitely. Any differences? What's like the first thing that just jumps out that you see? Yeah, definitely a little smaller. Appreciate that. All right, what about you guys really quick? Is there anything else that you see?
More nodulation on that one.
Yep, definitely more nodules, it looks like, for sure. Any other thoughts?
That one's a lot darker in color.
Oh, darker in color. All right, good. So we're starting to see some color differences. Appreciate that.
Those secondary roots all look like they kind of come out at the same level almost.
Yeah.
And some of them drop down, but this one has, I don't know, they come out lower on the taproot.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. On some of the roots, like if you guys start to look at this one in particular, you'll start to see almost like a X pattern start to form. I don't know if you guys can kind of see that, almost like quadrants. Whereas this one tends to be a little bit more random. It doesn't have like a distinct pattern to its shape. So there's all sorts of different shapes and colors and sizes and things going on with these roots. So I'll ask you, what do you think the perfect soybean root is? If you were a soybean plant, what kind of roots would you want? What traits, what characteristics, what do you want in order to grow in the good soil?
Maybe a little wider out because they're not as tall.
Okay. So more structure, you have physical structure to help hold it. Good, I like that. What else? What do you think? If you were a soybean plant, what roots would you want?
You want a long taproot to reach water when it's dry.
Yeah, you do, definitely. Taproot in order to get that water during drought season, all right? What other ideas or thoughts? If you were a soybean root, what would you want?
All depends on where you're growing.
Okay, so you tell me, let's say we're growing over in Muscatine. It's really sandy soil over there. What do you want? Deep taproot. What about right here in Ames? What would you want? More structure, okay. All right, I can appreciate that. Why do you think you'd want more structure? What? Wind, okay. So one thing that's really cool about these secondary roots is that with secondary roots, that tends to be where we're getting most of the nutrients. So your phosphorus, your potassium, a lot of that's coming in from this root zone. And so when they're able to reach out to that in those areas, you're getting a lot more of those nutrients as well. Now, if you're a soybean plant, do you want to put all of your energy into building roots? No, why not?
So if they have enough energy to get above ground.
Yeah, you got to care about your shoots, right? I mean, if all I cared about was wearing boots, it'd be a really rough day if I walked into school with nothing else on, okay? So you got to care about the whole plant, and you have to investigate everything that's going on, so from roots all the way to shoot. And that's part of what I'm trying to investigate. So I'm digging through these roots and literally digging out hundreds of roots to investigate all of the different traits that we can see between each one. Now, I don't get to have all the super cool toys and technology like they have because, you know, it's really hard to see into the soil. But what I am trying to do is use some of this technology and these traits to investigate what's happening above ground. And then when I dig up these roots, I can build those correlations to see what's happening below ground. And then hopefully in the future, maybe Matt would be able to fly over my field and then tell me, hey, I bet I can predict what your roots are doing right now because we know the relationship from root to shoot. So some of the ways that right now I'm able to acquire that above ground information is using this thing right here. So our PhenoCart, it was mentioned a little bit earlier, but we can take this through the field and we'll have a computer inside of there and image the soybean rows or the plots as we drive through it so I can get really detailed pictures of those plants above ground. Something else we could start doing in the future is maybe using the rover to be able to investigate these plants, the shoots, and then dig them up right away and see what's happening in the roots at the same point in time. On top of that, I'm really interested in what's happening with these nodules. You know, we see in the literature that if you have too many nodules, your yield just really tanks, okay? And if you have too few nodules, what do you think is going to happen to your yield there? Are you going to get 90 bushel beans with no nodules? Probably not, unless you're putting a ton of extra nitrogen on there, which, you're kind of missing out on free nitrogen then. So, we have to find that sweet spot, that point in the middle that really gives you what you're trying to get in that nodulation. Now, if I were to give you this root right now, and you were to just guess, how many nodules do you think are on there? 150? All right. What do you think? How many nodules do you think are on there? 200? All right. So we're just kind of taking some guesses. We're throwing ideas at how many nodules are on these roots. And, that's kind of a problem when you're just guessing how many there are. So as scientists, we have to try and actually investigate, what is there? So we could sit there and actually count them all. But how long do you think it would take to count all these nodules? You have to pull every single one off one by one, then count it all. Probably take a long time, right? And if I were to give the picture of this root to an undergrad, I could give the same undergrad the same picture 2 different times throughout the day, and then I've seen in the past up to 17% difference in how they count it. Like, I can't use that information. That doesn't help me at all. So then we're able to start using systems of machine learning, where we're able to train a computer in order to investigate and count and identify where those nodules are at. So I want to show you a little bit about what we're doing there. So I work with an awesome engineer, and his name is Zaki. And Zaki has worked to help me develop what we call SNAP, or the Soybean Nodule Acquisition Pipeline. Now, I can take a picture of a soybean root and run it through SNAP, and it can show me exactly where and how many nodules I have on that root. I think it's a lot faster to do that than it is to try and sit there and count them all by hand. And so when I'm investigating those nodules, it can tell me how big they are, where they're at on the root, and it can even then show me, are they on the tap root or on the secondary roots? And I can start to ask a lot more questions about those nodules and what they're doing on the root. And then I can investigate what those nodules are doing across time as well. Because these nodules, I kind of think of it like a dating relationship. They start meeting, they get together, and they're like, oh, this is pretty cool, I think this is great. And the nodules, the bacteria is getting tons of carbon from the plant, and it's this awesome relationship. And then eventually, later on, as they keep maturing, the soybean plant says, I don't know if this is going to work out for me anymore. And then it stops giving the carbon to the bacteria, and they start dying off. And then you're ready to fill your soybean seed, and you're just not getting any more nitrogen. And you're like, hey, why'd you stop that bacterial growth? Why'd you cut that off? And so we can investigate that using SNAP to start saying, okay, which genotypes maintain that nodule growth throughout the growing season? And then we can start investigating what's happening between why it decides to shut that on and off. So some of the reason we want to investigate all of our different soybean roots is because of this. Now, these soybeans were planted on the exact same day, all right? And which one of these plants would you want in your field? This one? Yeah, I think it's a fairly easy decision. All right? Why would you want this plant in your field? What do you think? Why do you want this one?
More productive.
And more productive? How do you know it's more productive?
Because it has a bigger root system.
Okay. Bigger roots, more leaves. How else do you know it's more productive? I think you're right. I'm just curious, what goes through your mind? How are you assuming that it's more productive? Yeah, more nodes, more pods, all right? You can kind of see it on this plant here. You can see the little purple flowers that are on there, all right? Every one of those flowers has the potential to become a pod. On this one, there was a white, there's like